Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. It's a little bit strange just speaking out into the ether, but I'm sure you'll be able to hear me. Done it a few times now. So um, thank you for joining me this afternoon on this webinar on principles of management system risk. I'm going to run for about kind of half hour, 40 minutes or so thereabouts. And oh, thank you everyone. I can see some messages on my screen telling me you can hear me, so that's good. So the system's working, that's great. Okay, so we're just going to talk for, or I'm going to talk for half hour, 40 minutes or so, just on some principles of management system risk. Just run through some ideas with you about things that I've seen through my experience through auditing over the years, and hopefully that will kind of resonate and give you some pointers for you all to move forward with. Okay. Before we kick off officially, if you like, a little bit of background on NQA for those of you that don't know. There's a little illustration there on the screen, just about kind of who we are, where we operate, and the kind of numbers that we're involved with. So feel free to kind of absorb that for a moment or two. You will get a copy of these slides, and indeed this recording is available as well if need be. So please feel free to make notes, but obviously it's not a memory test at the end of it. So just some information there about NQA and who we are, where we operate, and the things that we do. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I think hopefully we've answered this by I can see the messages coming through now telling me, so hopefully you can hear me, which is good. You should see a little dialogue box on your screen there that allows you to ask questions. Now you can ask those as you're going along. Now I won't answer those as we're going along because obviously that would just eat into the time, but I'll kind of save them for the end, and then I can respond to those kind of privately or as a group if need be. So if there is anything, please feel free to ask away. I won't respond as we go along, like I say, but we'll cluster them at the end. Okay. Now you will get a copy of this this presentation for your own reference as well. So hopefully you should be able to, if there's anything you want to reference during that point, then you can come back to that. Okay. Again, just a little couple of handfuls of things about kind of what we do at NQA. Lots of things going on there. Obviously, certifications we're involved with, quality, obviously aerospace, automotive, environmental, energy, health and safety, information resilience, food safety, risk management, and medical device as well. So quite a comprehensive offering there when it comes to NQA. Now, obviously, supporting that is our training services as well. For those of you that aren't aware, we offer training services to support these areas as well. So have a peruse around the website. It will give you a wealth of information, and you can absorb that at your leisure. Okay. Just on your screen there, just a handful of clients that we certify. Obviously, some names certainly you'll recognise and maybe remember the taste of, for the Costa and that kind of thing. Vodafone, I use them myself, so nice to know you're in safe hands when it comes to these kinds of things. So yeah, obviously, yeah, just a little illustration of some of the clients that we certify and the kind of status that we are. Okay. So a quick bit about me. It's not all about me, in case you're wondering what I look like. There I am, still got the beard, keeping it for Christmas. My name is Martin Graham. I am the training manager at NQA and also a field-based auditor, which means, well, previous to March, I used to go out in the field and deliver audits or undertake audits, but now I've been doing that remotely. But I also head up the training unit with my colleagues at NQA. Okay, been in the industry for around 20 years or so for my sins, covering quality, environmental, health and safety, energy management and so on, across a number of sectors. But yeah, it's all I know how to do, so I want to carry on doing it. So one of the things we're going to be, just on the left-hand side there, some of the things we're going to be talking about this afternoon, just kind of really, obviously risk is a big subject matter. We could spend probably an awful lot more time this on it, but just going to run through some of kind of the initial principles, some things to consider, things to maybe kind of get, think about when you're looking at your management systems or undertaking audits and so on and so forth, just based upon, the industry feedback that we've got, my experience and that of my colleagues as well. So we're going to run through what risk is in the context of ISO, principles of risk-based thinking as part of the process approach, why use and the benefits of risk-based thinking, and finally kind of a look at the risk clauses within ISO and the PDCA model. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a kind of a few slides on that. So I'll talk around them as we go along. Like I say, if there are any questions, fire them away into the little box there, or just listen away, and I'll answer them at the end for you. Okay. Okay, so off the bat then, what is risk? obviously, I think we're kind of all aware of it. We understand it in principle, but obviously in the context of ISO 9001, risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty. Okay, so something fundamentally that's going to, that is uncertain about your management system or your operations. That by definition is the risk associated within the ISO standards. Okay. So like it says there, within the context of ISO management systems, this relates to the risks associated with achieving intended results, enhancing desirable effects, preventing undesirable effects, and achieving improvements. So when you're looking at risk in the context of ISO, bear those things in mind, and they are kind of embedded within the standard there. They're words from the standard. So you've got to look at kind of the uncertainties associated with achieving these things. Okay, that's on the screen now. So think about the intended results of the management system. It's your policy, it's customer satisfaction, it's your objectives, it's compliance, and so on. So all those kind of things that can factor in, can essentially allow for uncertainty within your day-to-day operations. Now, it's always been implicit and implied. For those of you who've been around ISOs for any length of time, I'm sure you remember this idea of preventative action that sat at the back of the previous ISO standards. So it's always kind of been there. It's not a new concept. It's just really kind of become a little much more kind of obvious, if you like, and within the standards. Okay, so preventative action was always there, but obviously they're pulled it to the front of the standards in the kind of the planning section, the risks and opportunities clauses, which we'll come on to in a little while. Okay. So where is there risk and uncertainty? Any number of places, obviously, it's most things in life, but typically within kind of management systems and day-to-day operations. You've got obviously the ultimate variable, which is people. You've got the process uncertainties, the product itself, and infrastructure. Okay, so there's a handful of ideas there to consider where kind of these uncertainties may appear within your management system and operations. Okay, so identify and address the uncertainty, and by definition, you can address the risk. Okay, so just really looking at those kind of look where the doubts are in the system. Is it the people, the process, the product, the infrastructure? Where in these things are there uncertainties? Where are the gaps? And how can we look to address those? And that's what the standards are asking for. Okay. Now, risk can apply, and indeed it does apply to pretty much any management system. It's certainly within those that are following the Annex SL structure. But don't confuse necessarily with occupational health and safety risks or aspects and impacts. Now, they can obviously, they sit very closely alongside each other. But when the standard talks about risks and opportunities, it's really kind of talking about those things in that second paragraph there, about the risk associated with achieving the intended results of the management system. Okay, so that's what it's kind of really getting to. Within environmental and health and safety standards, there's particular clauses associated with risks, health and safety risks, and aspects and impacts. So there's dedicated clauses to that, whereas the risks and opportunities clause is a standalone thing that asks you to think about the uncertainties associated with your management system. Okay. So in plain English, having said all of that, what is in doubt that could affect what we do? So what are the doubts, and whereabouts are they, and what do we do to address them? Okay. So types of risks then, things to consider then when it comes to thinking about risk-based thinking. Naturally, financial, obviously, there's any number of financial elements there, although the standards aren't necessarily financial standards. Obviously, we're all in business to earn a living and make money. So there's financial risks there certainly to consider. There are compliance obligations, compliance-related risks. So, not being aware of compliance obligations, not being aware of compliance obligations necessarily, or being up to date with them, and so on and so forth. So there's those kinds of things, and also risks associated with product compliance. So if you've got a kind of a product related requirement or service related requirement that's a compliance obligation, you need to be sure that you're aware of that. There's a potential uncertainty there. Human, obviously, absolutely, yes. You've got variables, like we say, the ultimate variable, which is human, obviously, and that goes down to people's behaviours and kind of maybe complacency to some degree, if there is such a thing. Obviously, and language and so on. You've got risks associated with there, people's understanding and general kind of competence and awareness of a system. There can be potential uncertainty there. Okay. Naturally, as we've already said, mentioned there, they do go hand in hand. Environmental health and safety risks, absolutely, but it's kind of fundamental here. It's you don't need to make a distinction necessarily between health and safety, hazards and risks and so on, but obviously you do need to think about kind of the intended outcomes of the management system. That's what you're trying to, in the context of ISO, what it's after. Okay. You've got perception risks. Obviously nowadays, customer perception, public perception, there can be uncertainties associated with that, things to consider. Naturally operational, that can be down to anything from documentation through to making sure that the right information is available, through to making the right logistical arrangements are in place and so on. And then finally, they're looking at infrastructure. So is the right, is the right equipment in place? Is the right training in place for that? Do people know kind of what they should and shouldn't be doing in a particular instance? And kind of really just looking at the areas that you can, these aren't obviously exhaustive. There's some of the things that you can take into consideration when looking at the types of risk associated with uncertainty and kind of management systems, okay? Within obviously, and within your context of your own organization. Okay. So the effects of uncertainty, or an uncertainty that affects, there you go, there's a play on words for you. So risk within ISO is defined as the former, okay, so that's the, if you like, the dictionary definition. But certainly the latter can determine the risk. So like we're saying, it's really just looking at the uncertainties associated with, with what you're doing as an organization. Okay, so and that uncertainty can create an effect, but obviously, the effect is the effect of that uncertainty as itself. Okay. Whichever is chosen though, whatever way you slice it, risk is involved and the output is the same, i.e. you have to kind of review, assess the risk, and take action, as you deem necessary to address it and mitigate it, okay, to kind of carry on so that you can start achieving your intended results. Okay. Action taken to address a risk typically addresses an uncertainty, okay, so if you're, that's kind of taking this whole thing, just like kind of pushing it that little bit further, okay, if you've identified a risk, you address an uncertainty, it's kind of one and the same thing, okay. The terminology is not critical here, it's really just that kind of understanding that principle, and it's something when I'm auditing is, talk to people and say, look, okay, take away the ISO language, if you like, and put it into something plain English and say, look, okay, what concerns you, what's uncertain, what are the doubts within, what you're doing, and what are you trying to achieve, and then and look at how attack it that way. Okay, so contextual risks, okay, in plain English, relevant uncertainties is one of the things that I always kind of, when I'm auditing now, the standards very much about kind of context. I know you like to use the word relevance when it comes to ISO. So basically, kind of everything that you do, every risk that you identify, keep it in context, keep it relevant, make it kind of value and worth to your organization or your management system. There will be some kind of generic things that will come into play, but obviously, all of this is really about kind of, improving your management system and achieving those intended results. So keep things in context, keep it relevant. So just a little bit then on risk-based thinking. Okay, so some of the things, risk-based is like it says there, should be systematic within the management system, not a separate component. It can be easy to fall into this trap and make it kind of like an isolated, a box in the corner, so to speak. But fundamentally, it should be kind of embedded within everything that you do, with kind of every process and function and part of your operation, your business has got risk associated with it. So, don't have it as a standalone thing. If you're going to put it in the context of health and safety risks and that process, everything's got a risk associated with it. But obviously, in the same way, quality or systematic risk applies to every process. Risk can exist in any part of the system, process, or functions, and should be considered at each stage. So don't think about it, just think of it as a holistic thing. Think about kind of whatever the risk and uncertainty may be, however small, or whatever stage, it can exist. Okay, but obviously the trick here is to assess that and look at kind of the effects, and you don't want to kind of overrate the custody in terms of actions. You want to make sure that the actions that you take can be effective and are worthwhile. Okay. Now, not all processes naturally carry or will be exposed to the same level of risks. There may be kind of activities within your organization that just simply don't, warrant or carry the same level of risk and uncertainty. Now, and so when you're looking at them, this is when you kind of need to address and kind of evaluate and have a system in place for kind of, scoring and, looking at kind of the potential effects that these risks can have. Okay. Identifying and addressing risks should be proactive rather than reactive process. Okay, it's not as most of these things. It sits within the planning section of ISOs. So section 6 there, which we'll come on to in a short while. So it really sits in that front end planning section of your management system. So there'll obviously be lessons learned that you, as time goes by, that you can then feed back into your planning process. So once you've been through kind of your check-in and process. But obviously, off the bat, there should be risk-based thinking should be a proactive thing rather than just a reactive, like it says there. Risk-based thinking is integral to everyday life and business operations, but fundamentally, recognizing and applying this is important. The chances are, and I almost guarantee this, that you're already addressing the clause, the risk-based clause. It's it can be one of the things is just looking at what you're already doing and seeing kind of and interpreting that and saying, look, okay, yeah, we are doing that. We're doing we're applying risk-based thinking, but it's then just recognizing that and putting it into and building that back into your system. Okay. Now, risk is not only negative, certainly not. One of the kind of biggest risks, or one of a risk in any business is competition or expansion. Kind of we will have doubts there. But those uncertainties, they can produce positive effects and opportunities. Okay, so obviously, with competition, yes, it's a risk and uncertainty. It's a risk, but obviously that can make you kind of more competitive and more efficient, and you can pursue an opportunity that way. Okay. Risk-based thinking allows you to consider the current situation and the possibilities for and impacts of change. So that's a big thing to consider. Obviously, change, as we've all been through this year, it carries with it by definition a degree of uncertainty. So it's kind of, that's one of the things that kind of you're looking for within your management system is how can it react to change? How can it change to react? How can it react to change to people, to processes, to product requirements, to customers' needs, to legislation, whatever it may be. So obviously within those changes, it carries uncertainties, it carries risks. So your management system needs to kind of just be able to kind of absorb those, process them, and then allow you to react to them. Okay. Now, some risks will be acceptable because that's just the way of life. But it's obviously what you need then to do as part of your planning process and when you're looking at your management system is look at the advantages and disadvantages of taking any action. You don't want to take action to kind of that will just over address the whole thing and become cumbersome and make it awkward for you as an organization to function. That's not what it's about. The standard doesn't say that you have to address every single risk. It just says that you need to determine them, apply this process, and to just make sure that you can achieve what you're trying to achieve with the management system. Remember, so yeah, is ultimately the risks of and associated with the achieving of the objectives of the management system, conformity of products and services, and achieving intended outcomes that are to be considered. That's really the crux of the whole thing. Okay, what are you trying to achieve with the management system, and what can trip you up along the way? And remember, obviously, your context, absolutely keep things relevant. Risk-based thinking isn't new. And very likely for nearly all of us, I would imagine, and certainly every organisation that I come across, it's something that you already do, okay, that it just needs to be recognised, and it's a continual process. Now, risk is all relative, like we said there, obviously within individual processes and procedures. It's the size and shape of those procedures. It's, the consequences. They can vary by organisation, product and service. So absolutely, this is where it comes important to keeping things in context, okay? So you don't want to kind of overanalyze or overthink it. If you've come to a conclusion on it, you're happy. Obviously, like it's a continual process, so you don't leave it parked. But obviously, you do kind of you make sure that you keep things relevant and up to date and up to and in context. Okay. Keep it simple. Absolutely, it's a good way of being. Certainly, when it comes to management systems, it's very easy to kind of overthink the whole thing. But basically, look, what you're trying to do here is, like I say, is look at what's uncertain. What are the risks, and then understand, review, and assess and act. And fundamentally, this is where that kind of plan, do, check, act, that PDCA process comes in, which is embedded within the ISO standards, which will come onto the PDCA just in a little while. Okay. Involvement of people. Okay, so whilst top management are required to be involved with and promote risk-based thinking, those directly involved with the process may be best placed in identifying the uncertainties that are involved. So another thing we mentioned there earlier on about the kind of making it kind of exists essentially within any part of the operation and your management system. Get the people involved. If you're talking to people and who are actually performing the task and the function, ask them. What do you think is good here? What could be better? Where do you think our faults and not faults, but uncertainties or doubts may be? Is there anything we could be doing better? Kind of if you're not doing it as efficiently or as effectively you could, then it could be uncertainties there. So get people involved. As many people as you can. Don't want to over engineer it, but get people involved, and they can kind of help you come up with ideas and help you with your management system there. Get that participation is important. Okay. Consider the issues that can affect your organization's values, performance, perception, and knowledge, and how can these issues affect your objectives. So again, just another point there to kind of push home that idea, that it's what the issues that can affect who you are and what you do. Obviously, need to consider, what actions are practical to take. Now, in some instances, you might want to avoid the activity altogether. You might eliminate, substitute, whatever it may be. Manage the likelihood, manage the consequence. Even you may even decide to accept the risk, or even pursue it if it leads to an opportunity. Like we said earlier, it's not necessarily always a bad thing. So that's the thing, to consider kind of what actions are practical to take. You don't want to kind of within the resources that you've got. Okay. So just carrying that idea a little bit further forward. So yes, you do need to take action. Obviously, determine the action that needs to be taken, but obviously keep things in context and proportionate. You don't want to kind of just work for yourselves. Okay. Like we said earlier, preventive action not necessarily gone. If you prefer it, you can use that term, absolutely. If people don't like the term risk, or it doesn't necessarily sit well with them for whatever reason, you can say, well, okay, we're trying to prevent things from going wrong. We're trying to be proactive in preventing issues within our system and our process. Risk-based thinking, basically, in principle here, it enables you as an organization to determine the factors that can cause its process and its management system to deviate from the planned results, to put in place preventative actions to minimize negative effects and to make the maximum use of opportunities. I think that's kind of, that's the important thing to remember there, that planned results. Okay, just keep it simple. What are we trying to achieve here with our management system? What are the planned results? And those planned results, like we say, they can be your objectives, they can be customer driven service level agreements, they can be KPIs, compliance obligations, any number of things. The planned results is what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Now, there's no correct methodology necessarily. There's ways of approaching this whole thing, which will come. A handful of ideas will come on to in a little while. But it's whatever. Remember, it's whatever works for you as an organisation. It's not there to impress an auditor, although it does sometimes. It's whatever works for you for the size and shape of who you are and what you're doing. Okay, the standard's not prescriptive in that regard. It just asks that you adopt this way of thinking, look for uncertainties, and address them within your system planning process. Okay. But ultimately, you may not be able to eliminate the uncertainties because it may just be there. The hazard, if you like, for want of a better phrase, may always exist, but you can certainly manage the effects and kind of how people approach it and how your process and system manages the whole thing. Okay. So just coming on to last few ideas on risk-based thinking. And so what are the failure points in the process? So think about kind of, for example, if you're looking at the process itself and you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, where are the failure points? Is it an input? Is it an output? Is it the person that they not understand? Is it our equipment itself? Is there not enough instruction at that point? It's just really kind of look at the potential failure points there, and that will kind of help you start to understand where you can go with the whole thing. Risk perception, broader resource input may highlight unnoticed risks, like we said there. Get people involved, get people's perception. We've all got different ideas and thoughts about things, and the kind of the the level of risk essentially. But obviously, so get that kind of balanced view on it. Okay. So one step at a time. Let's say you don't need to rate everything off the bat. It's basically a case of yes, one step at a time. Get people involved. Take a step at a time. You don't need to kind of do everything in one go. You can rate and evaluate the risks further down the line once you've gathered them what they are. And it will be a live thing. It's a continual thing. If you're going to compile a risk register, it'd be a live document. Keep it up to date. It's not an absolute thing. It's allowed to change, and indeed it probably should. Okay. Joined up thinking, absolutely, keep things in context, keep it relevant to you as an organization. Look through your processes, look at who you are, what you're doing, your customers and everything, and keep things in context. Okay. Document them if necessary, if you find that it helps, absolutely. Now, obviously, some of the standards, they require slightly different things. I won't confuse the issue now, but 9001 doesn't require that you document your risks and opportunities. It does require as part of your management review process that you obviously review the effectiveness of the actions that you take to address them. But within kind of environmental standards and health and safety standards, there's a subtle difference that's worth being aware of, in as much that both of those standards require slightly different levels of documentation when it comes to risks and opportunities. So just peruse that clause. Okay. So addressing the risks may identify opportunities. For example, a risk around your supply chain may ultimately end up with you, sourcing a better alternative. It's not unheard of. If you're thinking, okay, well, our supply chain is limited, or we've got our eggs in a basket, or whatever it may be, you might start to pursue and expand your supply chain, and it may lead to an overall improvement. Okay, so use it as a process for identifying opportunities as well. But there is uncertainty in everything, as I think we've discovered recently. Identifying this and evaluating the effect and determining action is the fundamental concept of risk-based thinking. Okay, so basically taking a step backwards, just looking at the potential gaps, the potential holes, and say, okay, how can we fill these, and who needs to be involved in filling them? Okay. So just to kind of illustrate, having said all of that, just to illustrate some of the possible effects of uncertainties, okay? These aren't exhaustive, but just to give you kind of some of the ideas that you can maybe start to think of as you roll that through your system, okay? So customer requirements not met, it's a fundamental goal and intent of a management system, but if you're not meeting that, that's a risk there, okay? You're not going to meet your customers' requirements in any sense of the word. Okay, there could be insufficient product knowledge. You may not be able to kind of, just keeping up to date with kind of, relevant legislations or compliance or specifications and technology. Wrong product delivered or late delivery. Okay, yeah, it's an effect of an uncertainty. It's a risk there. Incorrect materials used, sourced or used. Contamination, damage, certainly, within a product or as part of an environmental management system. Potential uncertainty and risk there. Within resources, like we said earlier, we've got people being a variable, okay? So there's potential risk associated with people's competence, their training, their awareness, their availability even, kind of one of the big things nowadays is about kind of succession and knowledge planning and that kind of thing. If you've got people out of an equation for whatever reason, does that leave a big gap and uncertainty within your management system and your operations? If you've got knowledge in people's heads and they disappear for whatever reason, it can leave a gap there. Accidents, certainly. Like I said there, resource succession failure, absolutely. Like the succession planning is becoming a big thing nowadays, business continuity and so on. Supply chain issues, yep, supply chains are a big part of most people's businesses, and doubts and uncertainties within them can be numerous, as I'm sure you'll all be aware. Financial instability and overspend, absolutely. Uncertainties and risks associated with that. Poor communication, language barriers, with the language barriers, there can be, from a health and safety perspective, there could be potential uncertainty or risk there if, there's not correct or sufficient communication. Like I say, in any sense of the word, not just health and safety, for poor communication can ultimately lead to an inefficient or ineffective management system and just not good for anyone. Compliance breaches, obviously nobody wants those. Compliance, obviously not good for anyone from a legal perspective. Process inefficiency, absolutely. You know, it can be one of the things that can ultimately come out of all this. You know, if there's risk and uncertainty. Infrastructure issues, you know, kind of, you know, are we maintaining that? Have we got correct maintenance programs in place in terms of, you know, safety, quality, and so on? Is it suitable, fit for purpose? You know, if it's creating an inefficiency, it creates an uncertainty within the system, can then lead to risks and problems further down the line. Uncontrolled change. We mentioned earlier on about the importance of change within a management system and the potential effect it can have in terms of risks. So yes, making sure that change is managed or captured effectively, that can be a good way of managing risk within your management system. Reputation damage, absolutely. That's kind of, like I say, it's not an exhaustive list. You know, say you don't make a note on these. You will get copies of the slides at the end. But yeah, just some of the things that you might want to factor in, take into consideration as part of your management system. You know, risk-based thinking. Okay. So possible benefits then, having done all of that, why on earth are we doing it apart from you know, just meeting the standard? Possible benefits: improve the likelihood of achieving your objectives. Like I say, it's those planned results. They're all part of your management system. Okay, and objectives certainly are part of that. Can lead to consistency of output. Now, output obviously can be anything. Obviously, that can be a production output, but it can be consistency in terms of, you know, the person, you know, a training, you know, so the overall kind of effectiveness of the management system. Okay. Can lead to benefits, you know, can lead to confidence in the system and its deliverables. So, you know, kind of if you're kind of managing the uncertainties and the risks, yeah, absolutely, you know, that can lead to confidence in the system and what you're trying to achieve, product and service, and indeed, you know, internal as well, the way the management, the way your company and organization is perceived internally. Can help to establish a proactive culture of improvement. Okay, like we said earlier, it's a continual process, this, and it's not negative, not in any sense of the word. You know, it's people hear risk, they think of, you know, negative, but it certainly shouldn't be that. It should be used as a positive, okay, of how we're going to manage and improve and reduce the uncertainties with who we are and what we do. Can certainly assist with audit, statutory and regulatory compliance. Absolutely, yes. If you're managing uncertainties, why not? You know, if you're looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of your process, yeah, absolutely, it can assist with the, you know, the compliance of your management system, certainly. Operational efficiency and governance. Okay, so like we said, just kind of taking that a step further, you know, kind of looking at the how you work as an organization. What are the steps? If you've got lots of steps and links in the chain, so to speak, within your process and your service provision and so on, looking at those and how they all fit together, you know, kind of how they all join together. You know, is the communication there? Is the handover of information? Is all the inputs and outputs gelling together? You know, if there's gaps or if there's staggered and inefficiencies in that, then it can lead to uncertainties and risks within your system. And effectiveness of change management, we've already mentioned there a few times. It's you know, kind of, you know, just this idea, you know, if you've got change within the system, is it capturing it? Is it being managed effectively? And then associated risks and uncertainties. Okay. So there's more, even, believe it or not, there's more potential benefits. The longer you think, the more you come up with. So you can look at it to kind of enhance your knowledge base. Okay, so I mentioned earlier on about kind of organizational knowledge. It's a clause within the standards now. You're required to maintain that and you know, and retain it, and it's obviously knowledge as well, with it sits in people's heads, as well as, you know, general who an organization is and what they do. So you can enhance your knowledge base as part of risk-based thinking. You can potentially improve stakeholder perception. Absolutely, it's a big thing nowadays. Well, it's always been. It can enhance system and operational resilience. Like I say, if you're mitigating risks and uncertainties, yeah, absolutely, it stands to reason that, you know, resilience could potentially be improved. Can obviously improve management system effectiveness. All these things combined can lead to the effectiveness of your management system, what it's trying to achieve. That's really think about what you're trying to achieve here. There's no need to overthink it any more than that. It's what you're trying to achieve. Preventing negative effects, absolutely. Can lead to improve reliability of products and services. Those things there. It's kind of really just, you know, these aren't, again, not exhaustive, but some of the reasons for taking this on board and kind of carrying this whole idea forward. So just a quick run through then of the risk clauses and PDCA. For those of you that got certified management systems or certainly work to an ISO standard, you'll recognize this kind of structure, that the PDCA, stands for Plan, Do, Check, Act, okay? Now within the standards, the ISO standards that follow a structure called Annex SL, which is the common ISO structure. We're going to walk through some of clauses 4 through 10 of those, because that's where those of you who've got the management system will recognize, okay? So section 4 then of the ISO standards, it talks about the determination of the management system processes exposed to risk. So fundamentally there, what it's saying is, okay, your management system is going to exist, and it needs to exist to kind of determine and cover the areas of the processes that are potentially exposed to risk there. All sits in that kind of getting the whole system set up. Okay. Leads on to clause 5, which requires that top management must engage. Okay, so there's a requirement within the standards now that there's a promotion and application of risk-based thinking directly by top management. Okay, although they may not necessarily get involved in the nitty-gritty, they're required to support and promote the whole thing internally within your management system. So clause 6 then, that's where the actual nuts and bolts of risks and opportunities sits. Okay, so that kind of is what we're kind of essentially talking about here. But fundamentally, that's where it requires that you identify risks and take action as appropriate. Okay. Leading through to clause 7, it requires that you provide the resources to address those risks, and obviously just your management system, but certainly it's all embedded within that. So provide necessary resources. Now that's people, infrastructure, and so on. Goes deeper into clause 8, which is managing operational processes in line with clause 6. So clause 6 is where you've done your planning, you've set your objectives, you looked at your risks and opportunities, and then you've actually got to kind of make these things happen within the operational side of things, and make sure that they put out, people know what they're doing. Leads into clause 9. Fundamentally, this is kind of where the check-in phase sits in. Okay, so you've done all your planning, identified your risks, looked at the actions you want to take, taken them. Now you went in to say, okay, are we actually doing this, and has it been an effective process? Are the actions the right ones? Do we need to revisit them? Do we need to reevaluate our risks, and so on? Okay, that leads ultimately kind of into section 10, which is addressing undesired effects and fundamentally improvement. So this is kind of really what it's all about. That PDCA, these clauses 4 through 10, they cover that plan, do, check, act cycle. So you're setting out your planning through your planning clauses, like I say, and then checking them, and then acting upon them as need be. Okay, you can see this kind of circle that goes round and round. Okay, there's there. So you've got the plan, do, check, act there. So planning, leadership commitment, absolutely. Identify and assess and plan actions to address the risks. Leading on to doing, implement and communicate the mitigation plan, monitor the implementation phase, and then implementing changes to your risk and system. And that then leads back into the planning again. So it goes around in a happy circle. Okay, see a little illustration there on your screen about the PDCA. Now there's a little illustration of PDCA within all of the ISO standards, so it's certainly worth having a look at the beginning of those, and it gives an illustration of where the clauses sit within the PDCA process. So risk-based thinking then, so you've kind of done all the hard work, if you like. You set the system up, you've identified your risks, and you've got top management involved, and you're doing the thing, and so on and so forth. Some of the things you can manage in terms of a management program then, okay? So very simple kind of steps to take when it comes to risk-based thinking. So you identify straight off the bat, then you analyze. Okay, so you assess kind of the level of the risk, and kind of whatever means you're going to do that, be it numerical or whatever format you're going to choose, whatever methodology. You then treat it, okay, with actions to address the risks. You monitor them, certainly. So obviously you make sure that that the actions being effective, and is the risk being controlled to the degree that you want it to, and then that ultimately leads to a control. So basically kind of a 5-step kind of process there, pretty kind of pretty straightforward, but all necessary and relevant steps when it comes to risk-based thinking and managing a risk. Okay, and it all goes around in a circle there. So once you've finished up controlling it, you may then go back and reassess your risk, the level, and adjust the actions as need be. Okay. So possible methodologies then. Number of ways you can attack this. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list, just a couple of things to think about. You may have heard some of these acronyms as you go along, but obviously you've got this idea of a SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You can look at that, you can Google any of these and they'll come up. It will kind of give you ideas on ways of attacking the whole thing. You look at PESTLE, that's off the top of my head now, a little memory test that kind of, it factors in things like political, environmental, social, technological, legal, economic. It's the idea is that it kind of gets you thinking about kind of the different factors and steps within an organization that could be affected by risk. You've got FMEA, failure mode effect analysis. You've got dedicated standards, ISO 31000, that is all about kind of risk-based thinking and takes the whole thing to the next level. Okay. You can look at cause and effect, brainstorming, absolutely. We mentioned about getting people involved in the process, certainly interview and root cause analysis. There's loads of ways you could do this. You don't have to do any of these. You can do all of them if you like, but it's, or you can just, sit around a table and talk about the whole thing. What do we think can affect us as an organization? So things to factor in when it comes to risk and leadership then, like I say, leadership is this whole all the standards now, they require risk-based thinking to be promoted by top management. Okay, so, and that is by definition leaders within an organization. Okay, so a couple of things to consider here. So you can't control people through policies, procedures, and policing necessarily. You can only do it through a strong risk management culture and absolute integrity in all leaders. So the idea is kind of leading from the front, promoting the whole thing, getting people involved and supporting it and engaging. Absolutely. Ask the right questions, certainly of leaders. It's leaders, managers, whatever you, top management and so on, kind of challenging underlying assumptions and engaging with the workers. Obviously not necessarily expecting to do it every day on a micromanagement level, absolutely not, but obviously just seem to be supporting the whole process and what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Consult with a mix of people, absolutely, like I've already said, getting involved. The more people you get involved, without making it too busy, obviously you want to keep it doing a controlled manner, but to get their thoughts and an input on the whole process. Encourage critical ideas and testing of assumptions. Keep the whole thing, kind of keep the whole thing, be critical, of your organisation and what you're doing, and say, look, challenge the process, challenge what's going on, and is there uncertainty there, and how can we address it? Okay. Some in summary, just a bit of a paragraph there. So policies and procedures for predicting, evaluating and managing risk are important. But if leaders don't ask the right questions, if they don't seek out a diversity of opinions and perspectives, and if they don't engage and promote the principles of risk-based thinking, these rules won't make any difference. And when that happens, the blame for the damaging consequences rests solely with leadership. So obviously, it kind of sits there. It's really saying, look, okay, it's embedded within the standard. It should be embedded. Risk-based thinking should be applied and adopted by top management leadership within an organization. We mentioned a little bit earlier on about kind of change and risk. Okay, so again, really important, obviously, when it comes to change, to some degree it can be considered maybe one of the biggest uncertainties within an organization, change, because it can involve change around people, change of a product, a process, a law, whatever it may be. And the idea is that obviously your management system needs to be set up and geared to react to that. Okay, so when you have your risk management system in place, you should keep this under constant review as things change. You should update your risk system, and one of the key areas it should be done within the plan of changes clause. Now there is actually there's plan for those who've read the standard. There is a clause around associated with change, and it kind of covers certainly in quality, environmental, health, and safety. So the idea is that your management system is set up so that it can react to and kind of deal with the uncertainties and risks associated with change within your management system. Now they can obviously come from, like we said, from many angles. Okay, it can be, like I say, people, processes, the product, pandemics, or whatever it may be. Obviously, it's how your management system reacts to that, and then kind of you manage the associated risks. Okay. So it says there, something as simple as changing the organization structure could have a huge impact on the management system, and the risk should be identified and considered. So it could be, you wish to remove a position within the structure and combine two roles into one. So what were all of the roles each person was performing, not just documented tasks, but the undocumented also. So can one person do all of the tasks? Is there a risk of some tasks not being performed? So it's kind of like, on the surface of it, a simple change, it can be that, but obviously then you've got to look at the potential impacts and the bigger picture, if you like. Okay, changing a particular process, it can have effect on the inputs and the outputs. And remember what we said earlier, that kind of how the whole thing gels together, how your management system, how your process and organization all gels together. There's all links in a chain, and they're all kind of potential failure points that you need to be looking at associated with what you're trying to achieve with your management system. Okay. So supply chain risk management then, absolutely mentioned suppliers a few times now. Okay, number of things that can come into play here. Obviously, the risks surrounding suppliers can include the risk of counterfeit parts, escape prevention, parts obsolescence, raw material testing, and so on and so forth. So the standard doesn't ask that you perform a risk assessment on each supplier or even on your management system, your processes. But obviously, from a supplier perspective, it's really kind of just looking at kind of your supply chain, and that can be from the types of products or processes that it's supplying, or it can be down to the sheer number. Is it just one person that you're relying upon? Is it just eggs in baskets, the old analogy, or is it kind of the process that have you got a strong enough control over what they're providing to your organization as a process? Okay, so really it's about looking at the mitigations that you could put in place when it comes to your supply chain, be it within the realms of reality, if you like. Okay, so looking at kind of what qualifications, what people are actually, if you've got suppliers and contractors coming into your premises to do a task for you, or even as an outsourced process as a contractor, who are they? What are the steps? What are the hoops you're making them jump through to have, so you can have confidence in what they're delivering? And this is all down to kind of that same principle, the uncertainties. Okay, what you're trying to achieve with the management system and supply chain, that can be certainly a big part of that. So some examples then, I suppose, associated with supply chain: suppliers going out of business. Have their alternatives been considered? Just some ones to consider here. People not understanding roles, responsibilities. So kind of how robust is is the management system? Are people aware of what they should be doing? Do they understand where they fit in the management system and the role that they play? So is how robust is your induction and training process? Okay, do people actually know what they shouldn't be doing? If they don't, then there's risk there, there's uncertainties there. If they don't understand their role, their responsibilities, their importance, if you like, within the system, kind of is it going to lead to uncertainties? Inadequate infrastructure. Okay, so absolutely, consider maintenance, instruction, and efficiency. If it's not maintained properly and people don't know how to use it, yeah, absolutely, it's logical that there's uncertainty and risk associated with that. Okay, poor communication. Is there a lack of it, or is it ineffective? Like we said there, if you're not communicating effectively, yeah, it can lead to uncertainties because people won't know what they should be doing, and be it documented communication or verbal or whatever it may be. There can be certainly uncertainties associated with that. Documentation: is it available? Is it up to date? Is it fit for use? That it's any kind of any levels of documentation that can can create uncertainty if it's not correct, fit for purpose, legible, controlled. Again, all potential risks within your management system. Okay. And external influences, how can they impact you and how can that be managed? We've already mentioned supply chain there, but obviously you've got members of the public and so on and so forth, visitors. They could all arguably create kind of uncertainties within your management system. There's variables there that you need to make sure that you've got controlled. Okay. The last kind of 49 minutes or so, really kind of looking at what you're looking at there. It's kind of what is uncertain around what you're trying to achieve and what it can affect and how you can manage it. So just really look at your management system, look at the intent. Remember those words, kind of the intended outcomes, what you're trying to achieve with the management system. Now, it will be things like your objectives and obviously customer satisfaction. There's obviously a number of things like compliance obligations and stakeholder perceptions and supply chains and so on. All of these are going to have little gaps and uncertainties that that you can fall down essentially, and can prevent you achieving what you're trying to achieve. And that's really what the standard's getting at, is saying, okay, look at what you can control and indeed control it. And when you've taken those actions, have they been effective? Do you need to take anything further, or can it kind of, does it fall under then a system of just control and monitoring? But yeah, so I think, yeah, keep it as simple as you possibly can. Keep it in context. Don't overthink it, but just look at what you do. Look at how your processes sit together, how one thing leads to the next, and look at the gaps and that you can potentially go down in that regard. Okay. So just that's pretty much it for me talking. Hopefully, I do hope that was of some interest. It's certainly an area that I spend a lot of time talking through when it comes to audits and have reasonable discussions with. It's like I say, it's something we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I'm not sure that would be good for anyone's health on a Friday afternoon. But certainly, kind of just one thing I do want to just run past you again. You will get copies of this, but something that we are developing at NQA is these kind of advanced training courses. On your screen there are some of the areas that we're going to be covering within that. Now they're going to be short, kind of, if you like, bite size, for want of a better phrase, 2 or 3 hour kind of modules where we'll kind of focus on a particular area, go into a bit more detail and just enhance on some of the topics that you can see on the screen there. Okay. So again, you will get copies of this. So it's not a memory test, no exams, but obviously, but feel free to take a mental note of those and peruse them at your leisure. They're all on our website. You can see the website address there. Okay. So officially then, that's it from me. Obviously now I'm going to stay online. There may be some questions that I've kind of kept half an eye open. There's been some questions coming through as we've been going along. I want to do my level best to answer those, each and every one of them. But like I say, if feel free to everyone to stay here. I'll keep answering as we go along. You will get copies of the slides. If there's any questions, you can go back to NQA, back to the office there. And but failing that, I hope everyone has a safe and happy and peaceful Christmas, and I wish you all the very best for the new year, and best of luck in your risk-based thinking. Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Take care.